Hi folks, my name's Nick Angus. I'm from Alt Visual Effects. I'm the head of 3D, and I'll just take you through a little bit of what we do. So we were founded in, thank you, founded in Brisbane in 2011, started with 6 of us, and in that time we've grown to well over 60 in those years. We're a full service visual effects post-production company, so we take it through from edit, concept, animation, 2D animation, full visual effects, online mastering, grading, bit of everything. So in that time we've managed to become the most awarded visual effects company in the Asia Pacific region. But yeah, we didn't get into it for the awards. We got into it for the fast cars and the beautiful women. There we are, young and fresh. What a time. And yes, someone let us grow and grow, so off we went. So we've opened in Brisbane, Sydney, LA, Tokyo up there, and most recently Melbourne. So we came out of the gate pretty fast. We had a great commercial to start with, Tui's Extra Dry, the one with the deer coming home from the big night out. And we sort of put it together to be able to do that. We got the software we knew at the time. We got everything we needed to augment that all together, and soon found ourselves with lots more work, but lots more varied work, and lots more pressure to deliver different kinds of work in with all the limitations and budget requirements that comes with that. So we started with Maya. We did everything in Maya. We rigged, we modelled, we lit, shaded. We used shave and haircut for grooming. We used RealFlow for fluids. We used Naiad for big fluids. We used Massive for crowds. We rendered in V-Ray. We used 3Delight, the RenderMan style renderer, for fur and rendering the massive crowds. So we kind of had to split between renderers and all the other little plugins that I've thankfully forgotten about. So that brought us to the question of what's this Houdini all about? It sounds great. We're being talked to all the time by successful people who are using it. It looks pretty scary. And I started to reach out to a few interesting people around the world. 2 guys in particular, Geordie Barras and Andy Nicholas. I think Andy's at Frame Store now, and Geordie might be back at the mill. Geordie wrote a really great transitional guide to people coming from other applications, probably more specifically Softimage, XSI, and Maya, which was a really great help. And I had a few communications with him, just quick emails about approaches, and Andy as well. Andy had a great little blog going, and I reached out to him and sort of asked his opinion on it, and he came up with a line which kind of resonated for me, which is don't think of Houdini as another 3D app. It's not just another one of the things you're used to. It's an operating system for 3D. It's much deeper, and that didn't mean a lot to me at the time, but now it does. Now I understand what he meant by that. So it became a new environment for us. It let us get procedural at the time, not understanding what procedural even meant. Now makes a lot of sense. It means you can keep complex setups and just change components and inputs to kind of keep this stuff all on track. All the ideas you've built up and all the effort you've put in just is able to sit around. I had a great renderer that could use all the data that we were able to generate along the way through modelling and simulation, and use that in the renderer. Great palette of tools for modelling with volumes, which I never understood at the time, and then gradually became apparent what modelling in volumes could entail. Rigid body dynamics, flip solver, a great pyro solver, particle systems that could interact with everything. The best fur tools I've ever used, and that just keep growing. They're changing every year dramatically, actually. For us, I think that's been a real sell for us, is that we do a lot of characters, and we do a lot of furred characters, and as I'll get into, some feathered characters, and you can really jump into this, and it feels like they've really listened to a lot of people with all the time-old problems with fur. And all this without leaving that framework, that sort of that 3D operating system that I spoke about. So if you look at a quick sort of graph of our process, would be modelling. Nobody really cares about modelling as far as what software is used these days. It's kind of whatever suits the artist. Texturing the same. We're rigging and animating still in Maya for now. But everything after that, fur, feathers, surfacing, look development, lighting, effects, rendering, all stays in the Houdini world. And the beauty of the Alembic world for us, and obviously USD is coming up fast, and that'll be the sort of migration for us next, is that really you only need a textured model to start doing all these things. You don't have to. We can start an asset, we can start look developing, we can start lighting and rendering shots even though we may not have animation yet. But that arrives on the scene in due course, but we can be very prepared before we even have a rigged character, which is great. Our pipeline is fairly simple, mostly written in Python, written internally. It's really tools for saving, storing, making sure that the guidelines are there for people if they show up and have no experience in our pipeline, that they're saving in the right place, they're opening from the right place, it's obvious to them, all the caches are going in the right folder, the render farm knows what you're sending to it. So kind of things, when I say it's an artist-driven pipeline, it's driven by needs. It's not designed kind of outside that sphere. It really is, do we need it? How much do we need it? Is it going to be helpful? Is it simple? Okay, let's introduce it. So back to the Houdini side of things, we use HDAs, digital assets, for everything, version controlling, updating existing assets. We can have TDs working on existing assets while we're still using them in shots. And we try and publish up simple controls for artists. So it may be some caching tools, it may be a few switches to do resolutions or styles or shaders, essentially just an Alembic cache path. So once that's laid out and connected to those caches, really once an animation's updated, we don't really have to have too much human involvement with that, which is where I find a lot of the mistakes happen along the way. It slows things down. We've got another system for sharing not so much assets. We call it SLAP. It's essentially just a way of passing around cool stuff that we've made. It's a bit more of an informal process. So we'll say, oh, that thing you made yesterday that had 4 wrangles and a blast node at the end of it, that was great. What did that do? Okay, can you slap it to me? We can save that as a project-based slap or a user-based slap. So I can have my own collection of stuff that I know that I use frequently, that I keep for myself, and other people have access to as well, which is really nice. So our pipeline's set up to launch Houdini based on a project. So we don't just open Houdini vanilla, we launch Houdini in the project. So at the beginning of a project, we'll decide, what build of Houdini are we comfortable with for this project? Is this a smaller project that could take maybe a new version? Could we go 17.5 on this, or are we still locked to 17 because of the Arnold renderer, or because of the fur tools or something like that? So that's decided early. Whoever launches in that project is using the right version of Houdini, the right version of the renderer, whether it's Mantras, obviously that's built in, but Arnold has to interface as well. And that becomes, the same thing applies when we pull an archive back from a project that may be a year old. All that stuff comes back with it. So we don't have to go, oh, which version of Houdini did we use for that project? We know that, it's there. Everything's there that you need, which is great. And all the rest of our tool development is inside Houdini. We don't need to leave that zone. So that takes me to probably the first of our commercials. So this one was a bit of a challenge. This is a local commercial for Australia with Honda. Really, this one put the Pyro Solver through its paces. Everybody knows who's used the Pyro Solver. It's tricky when you've got long lines of things like missile trails, comets, anything that has to have a good resolution but has to travel a great distance. So that was a challenge. We got into clustering for the comet, and some interesting nuclear explosions and small meteor explosions. So I'll take you through the spot.
Coming up, CJ has the poop scoop at the dog show. But first, Dr. George.
CJ, no. We've stolen a Shih Tzu. No way, darling.
And we're cutting live now to our very own CJ Camille.
We up? Okay, it's heading south, and it has cleared the city.
Can you put your hands in your head? Oh no! I said, I wanna dig you and lay feedings. You know, well you know you had
CJ,
it coming to you. You know you had it coming to you.
Good work. Go.
And now to Glenn, who has the hot scoop at the dog show.
Thank you, CJ.
We chased a dream to bring you the bold new Honda Civic. Go chase yours.
So, quickly glossing over this, the Meteor system. Essentially, we had to previs this stuff pretty heavily with the director, and he had a lot of changes of mind and changes of heart, and as it progressed, wanted to move things around quite a lot. So the best way for us to do that was to have the animators lay this out, which was laid out in Maya, built with timed NURBS curves, extruded tubes, so they could visualize what was going on, where the timings, where it happened. So the best thing for us to do was to take that data and build an asset from that. So we started with the curve from Maya, the animated curve, which gave us our timing and our location and a target. We would then fire a sphere down this curve, and that would emit density and velocity into a pyro sim. So that gives us our trail. And then based on the end of this curve, wherever it may be, it would build a pre-shattered piece of ground geometry with its own little self-contained pyro solver that was timed by the end of the curve. So as soon as the sphere reached the end of the curve, it would trigger this little explosion. So we really only had to build one of these assets. The idea was then to give it a few seeds and a few controls to differentiate them, so it didn't look like a bunch of little cloned meteors all landing kind of simultaneously. And the artist then just had a cache path and some basic controls on that. So once this was set up, initially it was really just a case of you could almost run it through blind. Almost didn't need to open a GUI version of Houdini. You could just pump this straight back through the render farm. It would pre-sim with its dependencies and then roll through to a render. So sort of took out a lot of the human involvement with that, which was nice. We'd had some ground explosions. There was a lot of stuff they couldn't do on the day, obviously for safety reasons, and they didn't want to damage the car. So they were really specific looking explosions. So the idea ended up being kind of simple in some ways. I built a bunch of grids that were rotatable, so we could kind of choose where our little smoke tendrils exactly went to suit the shot, and simply just used a little paint splat in the middle, which we called the speed attribute, which drove velocity and emission in a fairly simple particle system. It worked really well because it gives us that kind of tendril cone shape, which was really synonymous with these kinds of explosions. And you'll see here, it's there's nothing too fancy about it, quite short lifespans, but really controllable and gave us really the exact kind of look we wanted with these often tricky to do little shapes. So then that was fed into a pyro system as, once again, density and velocity. Fairly simple for the artist to work with and cache, and the trick for that one was the velocity into the pyro. You could control that pretty easily, and that would sort of suck more of the density through or not. If you wanted the thin kind of tendrils, or you wanted really large movements of earth and dust, and this could then drive, the velocities of this stuff could then drive debris and finer particles, which worked really well. So I'll give you a quick making of that. Should mention all the felled trees were Houdini instances as well, with some little pyro sims. Onto feathers, the dreaded feathers. I personally can't think of a harder thing to do in the 3D world. But yes, we had this Toyota Corolla spot that came up fairly quickly and unexpectedly, and we didn't really have much of a feather tool in place at the time. So I made contact with a guy named Ty Ryzenkowski. Sorry, Ty, if that's not the correct pronunciation. He was a side effects intern who'd done a fair bit of work on feathers, and he'd built a nice little feather tool essentially for building a single feather. And I knew that he'd sort of worked towards building something that was more put the feathers onto the creatures. And I made contact with him, and he said, "Look, I feel like I'm a couple of weeks away from finishing it, so maybe we could partner on this, and we could kind of share some knowledge, and we could keep him moving, help him a little bit financially, and that would help us no end." So we partnered, and our senior TD Chris Gardner helped out a bit too, and and off we went and hit the ground running fairly quickly. So I'll give you a quick look at that spot.
All new Toyota Corolla for the bold. Oh, what a feeling, Toyota.
And I'll bump straight into the making of for that one to keep things moving.
He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a bopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Blow rockin' Robin, 'cause we really gonna rock tonight. Every little swallow, every chickadee, every little bird in the tall oak tree. The wise or loud, the big black crow, flap of their wings, sing and go, bird, go. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Blow rockin' Robin, 'cause we really gonna rock tonight. Blow.
So the next one after that, it's funny how these things just seem to come in sort of twos and threes. We were asked to do a penguin for a Bank of Melbourne spot. So we've done a bit of an upgrade to the feathers at this point. We rebuilt the sop feather itself. We changed a fair bit of the fundamental stuff. We kept a lot of Ty's original grouping methodologies and grooming from the fur guide tools as well. And just kind of advanced it, and with feedback from our own artists and the way they liked to work. So we sort of pushed forward, and I'll jump into that spot too to keep things moving.
Victory is mine, yeah, surprisingly. I've been laying, waiting for your next mistake. I put in work and watch my status escalate. Now I'ma start collecting props, connecting plots, networking like a conference. Cause the nonsense is yet to stop. See, time is money, kid. And to me, it's funny, kid, when you meet heads talk. I see on Twitter, that's all my eyes can see. Victory is mine, yeah, surprisingly. I've been laying.
If you have the will, we have the way. Bank of...
All right, and into the before and afters. All right, so the technical aspects of feathers. I guess the recipe for a good feather tool. Make feathers with sop tools, adjust shape, colours, frizz, output, and that's curves. Basically, the modern way of doing feathers now, no more cards, curves. They look better. The renderers are advanced enough now to process them. And then we groom using the existing fur tools. There's no point to reinvent that wheel. The guide stuff works really well. Create some attributes on the skin for things like scale, density, groupings, what feather types are splattered onto what part of the body, all done with paint sops generally. And then groom, using an auto groom. We've tried using mesh distance from the beak, building gradients from that seem to work fairly well. That's a sort of base groom, and then you use the grooming tools above that to sort of refine that. That's worked pretty well for us. I've broken it down to sort of three options for feathers. There's rigid instanced feathers, which is pretty much just using the groom curves to make the skin normal to make an up vector, instance the feathers across the mesh. They're just rigid feathers at this stage, so it's just an instancing system with an angle set by the groom. Very fast to evaluate. Instancing, so it's got all the advantages of instancing. Disadvantages are they're rigid feathers. They don't curve, they just stick out. You can flatten them down. Interpenetration also becomes an issue as well. Many creatures this isn't an issue for. Bendy feathers, make polygon strips from the groom curves, deform the feathers to poly strips. That's sort of the current way of thinking for us. It's pretty fast to evaluate, and you can do the kind of front leading edges of wings and those nasty areas that tend to give you a nightmare. Disadvantages, same deal. You've got billions of curves in your scene, and interpenetration really still isn't solved. Simulated feathers, so that's where we're kind of looking at the moment. The vellum tools are showing a lot of hope. So it's cloth simming on those strips, detangling, deforming feathers to the poly strips again. Advantages, yes, it is prettier. It's a lot less interpenetration problems. Disadvantages, we all know that, higher RAM requirements, extra step for the simulation, and the best sims are no sims. And feathers just aren't generally as bendy as they are on all the demo videos we see of dynamic feathers. Rendering, lots of curves look nice. They look fluffy and soft and like feathers. Our render choice at the moment, Arnold, likes to render them, but it's also getting big render archives, and a render time procedure would be a thing of beauty for us right now. And that's what we're working on. So I'll just take you very quickly through a couple of processes. This is probably a great discovery for drawing curves, advecting grooms with curves, just simply drawing curves on the body, mirroring them for symmetry, doing a resample, driving that through the velocity to volume to velocity into the advect curves, and very quickly you'll see that we get a fairly nice flow over the body for very little time and input. And probably the only thing that's missing there is the wing didn't really catch that one, so let's draw a quick curve across the wing and cook that through again, and boom, you get a fairly nice sort of place to start looking at that. And here's a quick test of our sort of early days, I guess, vellum. That's a pretty nasty test, a lot of quick movement. You're getting probably more secondary animation than we'd like, but interpenetration's pretty good. That's a road to go down for sure. Quickly give you a look at the feather card tool. So that gives us our way to splat the final curves onto. So that's driven from the groom. Obviously, we've got a conform tool, which is kind of As you can see, I'm turning it on and off there, and various levels which can be painted as well, how much we want the feathers to conform to the body, whether there's lift. This can also be driven by data at some point from animation, things like stretching and squashing, where we want the feathers to maybe lift off the body, and do a few cool things like that. Maybe the sim will take care of some of that as well. And a little built-in basic detangling tool as well, without the need for simming. There you can see that, we don't often show this part in the viewport because it's a little bit, it's quick to navigate around but very slow to, you wouldn't want to change a frame on it or anything like that. It's pretty brutal, but that's the render stage. You can just see that's all curves, and there's the individual feather itself with all its controls. So that's something we've kind of refined over the last couple of years. We've got that nice little fluffy bit at the end that feathers tend to get, based on whether a contour feather or a flight feather or a head feather, and I'm slowly learning all the terminology for the feathers, but it escapes me today. So there you go, clumping, wobble, all kinds of ways of treating the feather, and jumping through a nice artist-friendly way of shaping the feather based on a curve. You'll see me quickly jump in there and start pushing it around, so you can really drive those feather types based on the kind of bird that you're doing. And rendering's fairly, once you've sort of pre-processed, it jumps in pretty quick to be able to render and re-render on the fly. Obviously some things change quickly, some things have to cook right back through again, so it's not the least painful process in the world, but it's improving all the time, and we're taking on a fairly big feather project right now for a feature film, so all this sort of work's coming to the fore, and there's still plenty more to do, but yeah, we're getting there. Thanks for listening. Hope that was somewhat informative. I'd love to pass around for questions if we have time. I've probably gone over a little bit, but yeah, if you guys are up for questions, happy to answer them. Hey, good, thanks. There's a detangle tool in 17.5, I believe. I don't think it was there before 17.5. That's what we're currently using. It's pretty good. It's not perfect. I think the little vellum demo where you're growing feathers from tiny and growing them out, I mean, that's how birds work. So growing them from nothing and then forcing them to collide along their journey to full growth, I think that's the ultimate way of doing it. Time will tell whether we're ultimately successful with that, but that's the idea.
Cool, thank you.
No problem. We all good? Awesome. Well, thanks very much.